fire extinguisher use and safety. This is one of those things that may seem pretty basic, something that everybody, looks at that fire extinguisher hanging on the wall and says, something bad happens, I know what to do there. Well, there's a little more that goes into it than just that fire extinguisher sitting on the wall. And so we want to talk about how we can do that, how we can keep ourselves safe in the event that we have to use this valuable piece of safety equipment. So we're going to talk about the basics of fire extinguishers, when it's appropriate to use a fire extinguisher, when it's not. We'll talk about the steps to safely using a fire extinguisher, and a little bit about fire safety as well, how to prevent the fires to start with. So what do you do if a fire happens where you're at? You kind of have a decision to make. Do I run or do I fight that fire? And there's some questions we have to ask ourselves about whether that will help us determine which of those is the appropriate thing. And it's going to vary from one situation to another. I've had the opportunity to fight fires in the past with a fire extinguisher, and I've been successful, and I've been unsuccessful. But there are situations where the building's fully involved, or it's a structural fire, where the best thing to do is just to get out. If you're not in a safe situation, you need to get out of the building. So that's a quick decision we have to make. So the decision to fight or flee from that fire involves a number of questions. One, do I have a safe exit? You always want to keep an exit to your back if you're intending to fight a fire. Do I have a place that I can safely get out of this building? I'm not going to get trapped. Is the fire in its incipient stage? What does that mean? It means, is it just started? Is it just gaining steam? If the fire is already established and it's moved into structural components, your option is to get out of the building. Is the fire non-structural? Like I just said, anytime it's moved into the structural part of the building, we should not be trying to fight that with a fire extinguisher. We should call 911, get out of the building, call 911, get the fire department there, and they can do their work. Ask yourself, am I trained? That's a critical part of this decision. Just knowing that the fire extinguisher is there doesn't qualify you to do that. Your employer has a responsibility to train you and prepare you to be able to do that. Do I have the correct equipment? Using the wrong type of fire extinguisher on a given type of fuel, given type of fire, can actually accentuate the fire. And so we have to know which equipment's right and that we have the right equipment for the fire that we're dealing with. Do I feel confident in success? If I look at that fire and I look at the fire extinguisher and say, I just don't think that there's going to be enough extinguishing agent to do that, kind of like this picture here, that's a pretty serious fire. And if we don't feel confident, just get out. Buy yourself the time. Keep yourself safe. All right, so just a few basics of fire before we move on. What does it take to make a fire? We have the old fire triangle. Oxygen, heat, and fuel are the three things that are really necessary to propagate a fire, and we can talk about chemical reactions and all of those things, but these are really the three elements that make that fire go. If we can remove one or more of those elements, we can kill the fire. Most extinguishing agents are going to work on the principle of segregating oxygen from that fire triangle and smothering the fire out. All right, so let's talk about fuels. Fuels are really all around us, from the papers that are on our desks to gasoline or pallets or cardboard or anything like that is potentially combustible. Those are all fuels. Some are more hazardous than others. Some are flammable and some are combustible. What's the difference between flammable and combustible? It really comes down to how volatile the material is and how easily it's ignited. So if we talk about a flammable liquid, that is a liquid that has a flash point less than 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Flash point is the temperature at which something would ignite in the presence of an ignition source. So gasoline definitely has a flash point below 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We can go out and start our car at below 0 temperatures, and so it's more dangerous than a material like diesel fuel, which is more of a combustible liquid. Its flash point is above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Common flammable liquids: gasoline, paint thinners, alcohol. You know, that simple isopropyl alcohol that we have in our bathroom is a highly flammable liquid. A lot of people don't realize that, and if it does catch on fire, the flame is almost invisible, and so it can really sneak up on us. Combustibles: these things are capable of catching fire and burning, but they may not be quite as flammable as flammable items. So common items like paper, cardboard, wood, trash, those type of items. Oxygen is an essential part of our fire. It's naturally occurring. It's about 21% in the air that we're standing in. We might actually bring it in from another source. Oxyacetylene torch. Somebody may be using medical oxygen, either for a medical condition, or maybe it's ambulance has an oxygen cylinder to help people that are in distress. Well, if that happens to leak and get where it shouldn't be, it can cause things to burn that don't normally burn, or burn very readily. Even things like firefighter turnouts that are not particularly combustible materials, you can be in direct contact with flames. If you expose them or saturate them with oxygen, they can burst into flames. Chlorine gas is another oxidizer that many of us work with if we're dealing with water treatment or wastewater treatment. So those are also considerations. The source of ignition could be a number of different things. Heat, sparks, flames. Open flames should be prohibited in our workplaces. Things like candles shouldn't be allowed. If you want to have a candle in the workplace to make it smell better, they have some UL listed candle heaters that eliminate the open flame. Any type of hot work that goes on in our facilities should be done under a hot work permit. So if you hire a contractor to come in and work on the HVAC system or to do some welding, they should have a permit in place to guide their work, make sure they have locked things out appropriately, and they have sufficient controls and extinguishing agents in place when they do those type of things, as well as a fire watch to verify in the hours after they've done this hot work that a fire's not going to start. Other types, friction and static electricity, can also cause fires. Let's talk about the different types of fire extinguishers that are out there. Type A is something that is used on fuels that make an ash. Standard combustibles, paper, cardboard, trash, those type of things. Type B is focused on flammable liquids and gases. Type C for live electrical equipment. Type D for combustible metals. There are certain types of metals, magnesium, sodium, various different metals, even aluminum in a finely divided state can be combustible, and once they get going, they burn exceptionally hot. Some of those are water reactive, and if we happen to put water on the fire, it can explode. Type K fire extinguishers are for oils and fats. This is focused on a restaurant or a kitchen type scenario where heated oils can combust. In those situations, if we put water onto an oil fire, it will actually explode and cause much more damage than maybe just having that fire burning and getting the proper extinguishing agent there. All right, so let's talk about different types of media. Water is something we can use on type A fires, and we've probably all done that with our campfire when it's time to put it out. Does a good job. Along with that, though, it does some damage. Just like foam, a wet material can cause damage to materials. Foam is used on type B, A and B fires. CO2, or carbon dioxide, is used on electrical equipment. That's something that is the reason why we use CO2 is because it doesn't damage the equipment the same that a dry chemical or water would use. Another reason we don't spray water on electrical fire is the potential for electrocution. Dry chemical, or ABC, fire extinguishers are really the most common that we see in most of your facilities, and that's kind of a combination of the A, B, and C type of extinguishing agent. It's a dry chemical, it's a powder material, and it makes a mess. It's something that can damage electrical components as well. So don't go into that thinking that is a do-all, end-all. In certain situations, we may want to look at a CO2 or a halon or other system if we've got very valuable servers or other electronic components that don't do very well with a powdered extinguishing agent. Type K, once again, is those are ones that we use in the kitchen. So if we've got a fryer or other type of oil or of a cooking system that uses oils, we might have a type K extinguisher there. Oh, I thought I got all of these videos out, and I did not. We had a little bit of trouble on the 7 o'clock version because I'd thrown these videos in, and I thought I had removed all of those, and I didn't. Have I missed anything, Doug or Brent? While I have to escape this thing out.
Well, while you're talking about the types of fires and fire extinguishers, I'll throw in a experience I had once with a piece of equipment in the workplace that caught on fire. It was actually the lighting, the fixture going into the lighting unit on a piece of equipment that caught on fire. And I grabbed an ABC fire extinguisher, which is appropriate for that type of fire, and I extinguished the fire, and it worked great. But just something to think about. It's not always the fire extinguisher that may be the best option. A simple switch that cut the power to that fixture would have, prevented a real big mess that I made when I discharged the fire extinguisher. It could have been a lot worse, but then again, sometimes, that fire extinguisher, the chemicals, do some additional damage and make a big mess. So if you can cut power to an electrical fire, for example, that may be a good first option to trying to fight that type of fire.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate you sharing that. So got the slides working again here. If we decide that we're going to fight this fire, we only do it if we meet some conditions. Number one, policy allows it. Your employer has to make a decision on whether it's appropriate to use a fire extinguisher or not. They're required under fire code to have fire extinguishers, depending on the occupancy, but they're not required to have you use the fire extinguishers. So a decision has to be made whether their policy allows it. Excuse me. If the fire, I'm going to turn it over to you, Doug.
Sorry, Jason. Jason's having a hard time here with his cough and cold here this morning. So he's mentioning, make sure you understand your policy for fighting fire, when you should be doing that. If your employer has maybe excluded certain activities, make sure that if you're going to fight a fire, that you're going to make sure and not get yourself in over your head. If a fire is in its incipient stages, in other words, it's just beginning, then you can get in there with the fire extinguisher if it's safe and fight that fire. But remember, if the fire is really involved, it's become a structural fire, it's moved into the structural components of the building, chances are that fire is going to be more than what you can deal with just a fire extinguisher. And so make sure that you're clear in your mind as to when it's appropriate to try and fight a fire versus your safety. Another thing that's important to remember, a fire extinguisher isn't just for trying to extinguish a fire, but if you're in a building that has a fire going on in it, you may need to make yourself an exit path, and a fire extinguisher can be used to try and fight a fire just enough to make a hole in the fire so that you can escape. And so that's another use for a fire extinguisher. It would be a shame if you were in a structural fire and you were trying to put the fire out with a fire extinguisher and then, you know, didn't have any chemical left to try and get yourself out. So remember, your first priority is always your personal safety. Get yourself out of that path of that fire as soon as possible. That's the most important thing. Make sure you have the right kind of extinguisher for the fire that you're going to be dealing with. Jason mentioned A, B, C, D, and K type fire extinguishers, and make sure that some analysis has gone on ahead of time to make sure that you have the right fire extinguisher for the types of fire hazards that you may be dealing with in your workplace. You know, make sure that you, if you're going to use a fire extinguisher, that you're confident in your ability to successfully put that fire out. If the fire is so big already that you know, you don't think you can be successful with it, then of course your first priority is to save yourself and get yourself out of that fire and to make yourself a clear path for escape using that fire extinguisher. You okay now, Jason?
I hope so. So thanks, Doug. Appreciate filling in there. The next step, once we've decided we're going to fight this fire, is to follow the appropriate steps, and that's PASS. It's an acronym that stands for pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze the top handle, and sweep from side to side. Really simple, but it's a great way to help us remember what these steps are. So pull the pin, pretty simple step. If we look in this picture, you can see that pin. It's metal and it has a ring on there, so we can get our finger into there and pull on it. There is a tamper seal. You can see the yellow part there. It's not always yellow, but in this situation it is. You're going to have to break that seal as you pull the pin. As we inspect those each month, we should look for that seal to be in place to make sure nobody has opened that up. So we pull that pin out. That prepares the extinguisher for use. And then the next step is to aim at the base of the fire. We grab a hold of the hose. In most of these extinguishers will have a hose, and you got to hold on fairly tightly to keep that from getting out of control. So we point at the base of the fire. Why do we aim at the base? Why do we not aim at those flames that are coming up? Well, the base is where the fuel is, and that's where we want to put this extinguishing agent to segregate it from the oxygen that is helping that fire to burn. If we shoot higher up, your agent will simply go through the flames and pretty much not work. How far back should you stand? This really depends on the type of extinguisher you're using, and we should each be familiar with that extinguisher. Look at the label. There are instructions on there that tell us exactly what to do. But in general, it's in anywhere from 6 to 10 feet away from the fire. Don't put yourself in a situation where you could get burned or injured. But we do need to be close enough to make sure that that the fire extinguisher will be effective. Doug, you ready?
So remember, when you pull the pin on the fire extinguisher, that bottom handle is going to be a fixed fixture. That's to hold the weight of the fire extinguisher. So when you squeeze, you're actually going to be pushing down the top portion of that handle to activate the fire extinguisher. Make sure that this is something that we've looked at. We've handled the fire extinguishers. We know how they feel. When you release the agent from that fire extinguisher, there's going to be a release of pressure. So you want to make sure that you're holding it firmly, especially the hose. Make sure you've got your hand grasping the hose so you can direct that stream of chemical at the base of the fire. A fire extinguisher isn't going to last that long. And so once you start releasing agent from that fire extinguisher, it's only going to go for, my experience, you might get 10, 15 seconds out of that. It's going to empty itself pretty quickly. So make sure you're being effective in how you're using that at the base of the fire, so that you can smother the fire and stop that chemical reaction that's going on. Jason?
Next step is we sweep side to side. Have you got me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me? All right. We're going to sweep side to side. Once we decide to fight a fire, we're going to commit to it and stick with it unless it becomes hazardous to us. So we aim at the base of that fire and we move side to side. So we cover the entire area where the fuel is. If the fire goes out, be ready. It might reignite. As oxygen comes back in the air, we've got fuel and heat there already. It could spontaneously combust and reignite. So you've got to be ready to hit it again. If you have used 2 fire extinguishers and the fire hasn't gone out, now's the time to leave the building. Leave the area. That lets us know that fire is not one that's going to be easily controlled, and we need to get the proper resources there to handle the fire. Why do we want to look at it? When we have fire extinguishers, we need to make sure that they are in place and that they will work, that they're functional. So it's important that we do regular inspections on our fire extinguishers. At least once a month, we go out and verify condition, and that they're present. You also want to document this on the back of the tag that's on that fire extinguisher. There's an area where you can initial that you've done your monthly inspection. We also want to check it and make sure it's been serviced. Each of these fire extinguishers needs to be serviced at least once a year. So we look and make sure it's there. Then we look at that tag. And on there, there'll be a punch that gives the year and the month. And that's the last time it was serviced. If it's been more than a year, then we need to get a contractor out there to service that equipment. Now, there are certain types of extinguishing units, particularly those on a type K extinguisher, on a fryer, and those may need to be inspected on a 6-month basis. But most are on 1 year. So we're going to look at the gauge and make sure we're in the green section. If we're in the red section on either side, then there's a problem with that fire extinguisher, and we need to get it serviced. So always check that. Doug mentioned this earlier, and I've seen that as well. As we're out walking around in your facilities, we've seen a number of times where the fire extinguisher was there, and it looked fine until you looked a little closer, and then you found that somebody had actually discharged it. Especially one of these dry chemical extinguishers, if you have even cracked open the valve, just a little bit of that powder gets into the opening in the valve, and it will leak out. And so once it's been used at all, you have to have it recharged and serviced again. It's good to have a checklist for your people to follow when they're looking at that, and we're really happy to send that out. If you're interested, just send us an email, and we'll send you out a monthly inspection sheet. And make sure your extinguishers are visible. Make sure they're easy to find. Ask yourself right now, where's the nearest fire extinguisher to me? If you don't know where that is, that's your assignment for after the webinar. So let's go out and familiarize ourselves with that. Are they there, and are they functional? All right. Just in summary, we want to be prepared. We don't want fires to happen, but occasionally they do, and so we need to be prepared. Know that you have the proper equipment in place, and know how to use it. If you haven't had the discussion at your place of work, can we use a fire extinguisher? When do we use it? What type do we have? That should be something that maybe you have a training on, and discuss. Here's what our plans are, and make sure you inspect those and so they're ready to go, and you follow those past steps when the time comes. All right. If you have any questions, You can type those in the chat box. Doug and Brent, have you got anything to add?
Nope, that was great, Jason.
Well, I'll apologize again for my cough. This has been an interesting bug. I don't see any questions coming in, and since I feel a coughing fit coming on, I think we're going to wrap it up. Thanks so much, everybody, for signing up today, and we appreciate your attendance and working hard towards keeping everybody safe out there. So go out and have a safe day. Thanks.
You have a nice